Welcome to another episode of Uncommon Voices, Uncommon Visions. I'm your host, Dr. Valerie Nyberg. I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to all the educators out there. May 8th through the 12th is Teacher Appreciation Week, and I wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you to those who really had a made a substantial impact on who I am as an educator and who I am as a person. So this episode is dedicated to the many teachers who had an active hand in helping me along the way. So I'm going to take you on a little retrospective of my journey through my education. This is episode 25. This is my salute to my teachers. I may have already shared with you that I attended 13 different elementary schools. When I sat down to think about it, 7 of those schools were here in Sacramento Unified School District. 2 were in the what's now called the Folsom Cordova Unified School District. I don't know if it was called that then. I just knew I went to 2 schools in Rancho Cordova. 1 was in the Washington Unified, which is in Yolo County. 2 were in the Detroit Public Schools. 1 was in Highland Park. I don't know where the other one was exactly. And then 1 was also in a Catholic school in Detroit. Then when I came back to California, I went to 1 middle school, Sutter Middle School for 7th and 8th grade. Went to Bishop Manogue for my freshman and sophomore year, and McClatchy for my junior and senior years. So one of my earliest memories was in 1st grade. It must have been that my mother came in for like a conference or something. I struggled in reading very, very early on in 1st grade. And I remember they started a new program that brought in some university students who were studying to become teachers. And so I was paired with a tutor. And I had a tutor at the beginning of the year. 1 tutor at the beginning of the year and 1 tutor at the end of the year. The tutor at the end of the year, I don't remember her name, but what I do remember was as we were wrapping up the end of the school year, she gave me this little cardboard box. She took me off campus to a donut shop that was on J Street. In fact, I just recently went past there about a month or so ago. I don't know if it's a donut shop, but there's still some eateries in that area. And we had a donut, and she gave me this little box, like a memento box. And I had that for years and years and years, somewhere between 3rd and 4th grade. And I don't even remember what we talked about, but she was such a nice lady and made it fun to learn how, even though reading was a struggle, she made it fun. And, she didn't make it feel like I was struggling. And then, she gave me something that I really did treasure, and I kept my treasures in it for a number of years until it kind of just fell apart. I also remember I had a 3rd grade. She wasn't my classroom teacher. She was a teacher who came to my classroom. I was still struggling in reading, so I was in this 3rd grade classroom, and she came to my classroom to escort me to another classroom that was in a lower grade where I would get some additional remedial help. And I remember one day on our way to that classroom, and I think she ran the learning in that classroom. I remember telling her how easy that learning was and how frustrated I was with the learning. And she said, well, this is where you are based on your test scores. And I remember, I don't remember demanding that she test me again, but I do remember expressing like, can you test me again? Or like, test me again. Like, I just remember saying to her, well, test me again. And somehow that got communicated to her, and she did. And I bounced from this remedial, like the cat sat on the mat kind of phonemic awareness, repetitive really boring reading lessons to the second highest reading group, which I was not prepared for. And I really struggled with. And I mean, I had a reading disability, and it was really difficult to have boomeranged from, one end to the other. And it was very intimidating. But the thing that really made a difference was I never went back to remedial reading. Well, technically, I never went back to that level of remedial reading. I did transfer schools in the middle of that school year, and my next third grade teacher did put me back in a slower reading group in the classroom, which was not super helpful. But I never had to go out of my classroom to get special services again in another um, really behind my grade level remedial reading class ever again. So I do appreciate whomever that teacher was or whomever that educator was who listened to me and gave me the opportunity to demonstrate that I could read above the level that I had come into that school looking like I was reading, and moved me accordingly, even though initially that wasn't where I looked like I was supposed to be. And then in fifth grade, this was I had Mr. Hughes. Jesu was the Catholic school I went to in fifth grade. So he was the school. I went to a public school to begin with at the beginning of fifth grade, and then I went to a public school at the end of fifth grade. So he was the school I went to for the majority of my fifth grade year, and he was a tremendous teacher. I remember learning about Eric the Red and Leif Erikson, and how he went in the coat room because Detroit schools had coat rooms, and he jumped on her desk, or he went in the coat room and he put on these coats, and he had this big stack of rulers, and he did like storytelling, like old fashioned storytelling. That was how he taught us that history. And he was animated, and just made it come alive in our classroom, and was always super energetic. I don't know where he got that energy from. And was charismatic and just made learning fun. These are pictures of Jesu in Detroit. They just celebrated in 2022. They just celebrated their 100th anniversary year. It's my understanding that Mr. Hughes did attend that ceremony. So I'm really in the process of trying to find him and reconnect with him, because he was that valuable a teacher to me, that I would love to let him know where I am in life, and how much his classroom and his teaching did mean to me, because I learned a lot, and um, he was a very important teacher for me. Then there was Mr. Richardson. So Mr. Richardson was my sixth grade teacher. It was the second school I went to in sixth grade. So I started at Fruit Ridge Elementary for the beginning of sixth grade. And ironically enough, Fruit Ridge Elementary was one of the kindergarten schools that I had attended. So it was like a coming home of sorts. I had gone there for kindergarten, returned for sixth grade, was there for about a month. Some things happened. And then my mother and I moved to West Sacramento, where we lived in a motel room. So technically, by today's standards, we were homeless. And Mr. Richardson, um, I can't even begin to express the role that he played in my academic development. First thing, like you can see on the PowerPoint slide. First thing, that's the year I earned the Presidential Academic Fitness Award. I can tell you from right now, I have no idea how I earned the Presidential Academic Fitness Award. I was told at the time when I asked, like, how did I earn this, that it was based on my test scores. I'd never had great test scores. I'd never been anywhere long enough to be super stable. And so that was a shock. But Mr. Richardson, all throughout the school year, he really encouraged me to see myself as a really bright and capable student. uh, Basically, in sixth grade was the only time in my whole academic career as a K-12 student that I ever got straight A's. So at the beginning of the first quarter, I got all A's and a B. And ironically, even though math was always my best subject, I got a B in math. I think it might have been because in Detroit, the math wasn't as advanced as it had been in California. And when I got back to California, when I went to Fruit Ridge, originally they didn't have enough math books. So they just kind of threw some math worksheets at me and took my math book to help with kids who really needed it. They didn't really think that like I was advanced, more advanced than most of the kids in my class. So they let me kind of teach myself, and they like let me and a few other kids teach ourselves math. So I wasn't coming in with a lot, like I was kind of just making it up on my own. So I think that's why I might have struggled in that year, was because that was decimos and fractions and those things. And I had at that point been largely self-taught, with not a lot of direct instruction from teachers, particularly with dividing and multiplying those things, and doing more manipulation of those. And I hadn't had the instruction. So that was the one place where I got a B all year until the last quarter. The last quarter, I was able to pull it up to an A, and that was when I got straight A's. But even from the very beginning, he wrote excellent student for the first report card. The second report card, he wrote fantastic self-motivated student. The third, he wrote, Valerie is a delightful student. She is a talented writer. The fourth one, he said, Valerie is extremely motivated to learn and achieve. And then at the bottom, he wrote, Valerie, your effort has been rewarding and wonderful to witness. I remember when he gave me my report card and I looked at him and I said, well, how come I have A's? And he says, because you earned them. And I looked at him and I said, but I'm not that smart. And he said, oh, Al, yes, you are. He's like, not only are you that smart, but you worked really hard and you earned these grades. And I remember him really challenging me at that point. The pretty much the only books I ever read were Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew Mysteries. And by Christmas, he was pushing me out of those books and into other books, because he was very clear that those were third and fourth grade reading level books, and that I needed to challenge myself with more sophisticated books, and really encouraging me to do that. I even remember like show and tell was this thing that we had to do. Oh gosh, I hated it, because I didn't have anything to show and tell. I lived in a motel room. Fifth grade, we left everything behind when we left Detroit, so I didn't have anything to show or to tell. And he encouraged me to really be creative. So I really liked to color, and I colored really well. So I took a bunch of things and colored them and created a whole like collage of different things that I had colored. And when kids try to make fun of that, he really got on their case for making fun of it, and really made it an example of creativity and skill and those kinds of things. So Mr. Richardson was really instrumental in helping me to regain some confidence that the years that I had before, fifth and sixth grade, had been really difficult years in my life. But he was really um, encouraging and really there to help build my confidence. I've already said that. And it wasn't that he was a perfect teacher. I mean, he's also the teacher who told me when my mother couldn't come to parent teacher conferences because we lived in West Sacramento and she worked in North Natomas. So she had to take 2 or 3 buses back and forth to work. And she worked, an hourly job. So if she wasn't at work, she didn't get paid. He said she doesn't care about your schooling, and I had to tell him no, she really does care about my schooling. It's just that she really has to be at work, and we had to have that conversation about what it means to care about, when your parents aren't there when they're supposed to be, that doesn't necessarily mean they don't care about your education. It just means that they have to put food on the table and, secure a residence. And again, that was before people really talked about living in a motel room as being homeless. So we were living hand to mouth, and he was telling me my mother didn't care about my education, which I knew to be not true. So and he was a big fan of the Challenger, and so we as a class had followed the entire. I can't remember the teacher's name, right? Christy McCullough. We had followed all of the developments of her preparing for that shuttle mission, and that morning I remember wanting to watch the takeoff, the launch live rather than watching a recording of it later on. So my mother let me stay home to watch it. And I saw it explode live on television. And when I got to school, I told Mr. Richardson, and he didn't believe me. And for most of the day, he thought I was lying until we wheeled a TV set into the room, and he saw it for himself. At which time he apologized profusely, and he just said it was so fantastic that he didn't think that it could have possibly been true. So it goes to show you that people make mistakes, teachers make mistakes, we all make mistakes. That didn't mean that he wasn't a wonderful teacher. He was a wonderful teacher, and he made an indelible impression upon me. Again, that's the only time in my whole K-12 academic career that I made straight A's. And I got the Presidential Academic Fitness Award signed by none other than Ronald Reagan himself. Yay. Not a big Reaganomics person. So, that was a really pivotal year that actually opened doors for me later on in my academic development. So kudos, I really do owe Mr. Richardson a huge debt for what he was able to do for me. Then we go on to seventh and eighth grade. So because I did get the Presidential Academic Fitness Award, and I had straight A's when I transferred into Sutter Middle School as a seventh grader, I was able to get into the Gifted and Talented program, which meant that as a seventh grader, I had Mrs. Perkins as a history teacher, and as an eighth grader, I had her as an ELA teacher. And first thing, Mrs. Perkins, she was not my first Black teacher. My first Black teacher, I had my first Black teachers in Detroit, Michigan, but she was my first Black teacher who actually really pushed me and my fellow students hard to learn, to question, to critically think and analyze. As gifted and talented students, she was always, I remember one of the first lessons she ever taught us was history is his story. it is the story of the conquering man who gets to tell the story of what happened. Now, remember, this is like the 80s. It wasn't the 90s, it wasn't the 2000s, it wasn't now. This was the 80s, and she was telling us, remember, when we read our history books, we're getting one version of what this history is. There are other versions we're not getting, and those versions are just as valid as, or even more so than what we're seeing here, because this is the conquering heroes version of the events. And that was an important thing to understand as a seventh and eighth grader, that things are a matter of perspective. We are filtering information from a certain perspective, that it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the only perspective out there. So we talk about postmodernism, and we talk about a lot of like critical race theories as something that people are talking about today. She was talking about these things before there was a huge theoretical framework, at least that we knew about, or that was really talked about even in a lot of classes, education classes, that helped us to go out and seek more information. So when we wrote our papers in class, we were always looking for the economic, political, and social implications of what was going on. And that was both for English papers, like in the novels that we were reading, and for the history that we were understanding and reading about. She was challenging us to dig deeper, to ask questions, to question the questions that we were asking, to really think about the perspectives we were bringing, and question where we were getting those perspectives from, and the perspectives of the material we were using, where was that coming from, and whose story was it telling, and why was it telling that story, and who was benefiting from, who was economically benefiting, or politically benefiting, or socially benefiting from that story. And that was seventh and eighth grade. I mean, that blew my mind, in terms of, we were fortunate to be able to have that early development, critical thinking, and critical awareness. I would call it liberatory, an education that was really geared towards helping us to discern for ourselves what we think is the truth, not encouraging us to believe what other people told us just because they told us. That was a perspective and a skill I learned in her classes. So then I went on to Bishop Manogue High School my freshman and sophomore year. I can't remember his name. I think he was a father. I'm not sure. I had my religion teacher, my freshman religion teacher. I took him in for Journey into Faith. He was also my Spanish 1 teacher. Poor guy. Um, I don't know what it was about his voice, but I constantly fell asleep in his class. The reason why I have a picture of churros and chocolate is because I took Spanish my 8th grade year, and I got like a C or a D in it. And my Spanish teacher, who was a Japanese lady, basically told me that I did very poorly, and that I didn't have the skills to go on to Spanish 2. So she recommended that I take Spanish 1 all over again. So I took Spanish 1 as a freshman, and it just so happened that we used the same exact book, Churros y Chocolate. And so, unfortunately for that particular teacher, I didn't really have to learn anything for Spanish that second year because I had already learned it all. And so I did a lot of sleeping that year. And we had this rotating schedule, like kind of like odd and even blocks. I don't remember if that was what it was, but there were days then when I had his two classes back to back, and I remember vividly I would get up from one chair, move to the other because like the Spanish class was huge, and so all the chairs were full, but the religion class was small, so we would sit in this circle. So when we went from the Spanish class to religion class, he would have us move our desks in a circle. I would get up, move the desk into a circle, sit down, and go right back to sleep. And I remember how frustrated he was with me because he he was just so frustrated. I was always asleep in his class. And he we I mean, we often talked about how dis disruptive what was, how he never he never took it personally. He never seemed to take it personally. He never said, this is highly disrespectful. He kept asking me what's going on. I don't understand, especially on those block days because it was a longer than normal period. And I would sleep the entire time. And he was just like, what, I don't understand what's going on. And I really didn't have an explanation for it, um, other than I was tired. And I told him I would try to stay awake and I would try to do better, and I did, but nothing I did worked. I would eat. I would eat cookies. I would, drink water. It didn't matter. I would just, like, a lot of the time I would just fall asleep in this class, either the Spanish class. A great deal of the time, it was mostly the Spanish class, but sometimes it was the Spanish class and the religion class. And the frustrating thing to him, I think, was that I did very well in both classes, nonetheless. And you know, he never failed me because of my behavior. He continued to teach me and to work with me nonetheless. And so, even though I cannot remember his name for the life of me, and when I look on my transcript, because I did transfer, I it doesn't list my teachers' names for my freshman and sophomore year. I don't remember his name. And when I look at my yearbook, I didn't get a yearbook my freshman year. I cannot find him in the yearbook my sophomore year. So I don't remember what his name was. I think he was a father, but I'm not sure. Um, but I I mention him because he showed me a lot of he showed me a lot of grace and a lot of patience and a lot of understanding when he didn't have to. He could have been very punitive and very nasty and very mean and taking it out on my grade and taking it out on me in other ways, but he chose not to. And now that I understand so much more about trauma and the effects of trauma, I understand why I slept so much in classes through high school, and why I was so exhausted so much of the time. But I didn't understand then, and there was no one to help guide me through that or help me understand during that time. Um, and he didn't make it harder on me; he helped me through it. So that gets me to my yep, my junior and senior year. I just kind of lumped these together because there were a lot of teachers. When I transferred to McClatchy, I got into the humanities and international studies program, which again, that was based on some test scores. It was also based on writing skills, and I had a lot of great teachers in that in his and outside of his. So you'll notice that the biggest name is Mrs. Star Joyle. She was my creative writing teacher. I took 4 semesters of her class. So I started taking her as a 0 period creative writing teacher in the morning. So I was literally there at like 0 dark 30. The sun would come up right in her face every morning. And to the point that my senior year, we actually made these handmade books of our work. So this is my book of my work. Um, I wasn't particularly proud of it because, I felt it didn't really look good, but here's it. I made it like completely handmade it myself. So a different view by Nikki Wilson, grade 12, CK McClatchy, supervising teacher, Betty Starr Joyle. So this was actually my senior quote. This is March 1992. 2 roads diverge in a wood, and I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So I put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 poems in here. And I typed all of these out on my typewriter at home. Most of these I wrote in her class in the 2 years that I had her. And by the time we created these books, there was a group of us who were kind of doing like an independent study with her. So by that, or I wasn't doing the 0 period with her anymore, but a group of us were doing an independent study with her. I also had Miss Robeson. Oh my gosh, Miss Robeson, she was my junior year American literature teacher. She was tough. She made us write reading journals, which I hated, but because she put reading and writing together, I learned so much more about reading and write. Like I learned so much more about reading. That was when I started to understand how I read and remember what I read, um and really start to dig into reading much more. It was almost like she opened a box that I just hadn't been able to open because she did it that way. She was the teacher who told me that I was really capable of doing well, but she was frustrated because I was always gone from school. I'd come, but I'd miss 5 days, or I'd come, or I'd miss 2 days. I'd be there, but I'd miss, 3 days. I was forever like missing days. And she told me that, like a lot of kids who had gone to Minogue, when Minogue closed, there was a group of us who transferred over to McClatchy, and some of us who had gotten into into HISP. I think there was like 5 or 6 of us who've gotten into HISP. And most of the students tanked fairly quickly. She told me point blank, she's like, you will get bounced out of this program unless you come every day for the next 3 weeks and I see your best work. And she was not playing with me. And this is an essay I wrote for her. It's dated June 2nd, 1991. It's about my mother getting shot by my grandfather. It's the very first time I ever wrote about it. My mother was very unhappy about me writing about it, but I had tried to write about something else and it didn't work. And so I switched topics at the last minute and I wrote about this. And it was part of a larger project for that, for the assignment. And I ended up getting an A on it. And she ended up recommending that I stay in the HISP program, which meant that I got to stay for my senior year. And she was no nonsense, kind of like Miss Perkins. You didn't mess around in her class, but it was ironic. I slept a great deal in her class too. And she didn't bust me for it. Again, she gave me a lot of grace. I don't know why. She was aware of it. I remember when she pulled me aside right before the end of the school year. She made me well aware that she was aware that I had been sleeping in her class. But she gave me grace when she didn't have to. I had Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett was my chemistry teacher. He had this favorite phrase. If you didn't pass your chemistry test, he had this phrase that you bought the farm. Let me tell you, I bought the farm. I bought the land all around the farm. Like I bought the whole thing, hook, line, or sinker. I didn't pass a single chemistry test all year. Even when he gave me chemistry books to other chemistry books to study with, I tried. He let me take chemistry tests at home. I tried everything. I tried cheating. I tried everything. I couldn't pass a chemistry test to save myself. Basically, it came down to when we were learning the periodic table, I was really sick with the bronchitis and the flu. And so I didn't learn it. And I never caught up because of that. And the man just continuously gave me D's all year long. So I was forever indebted to him. I also had my junior year, I also had Mrs. Jones. She was my trig and pre-cal teacher. That lady, she knew I loved math and I understood it. I was perpetually behind in her class, but I always took notes in her class as I was working on work that I was behind in. And sometimes I would correct mistakes that she made on the board, which was interesting because I understood the math. I just couldn't test well in it. And she tried to do everything that she could do to help me out. She definitely encouraged me. I gave up because I knew that calculus was a much different animal and I needed to be able to spit it out much more quickly. But she was kind and she was gentle as she could be. I appreciated her. My senior year, I had Mr. Darling. He was a great storyteller. We read wonderful books in his class. Did a lot of reading, like the summer between junior and senior year. I did a lot of reading. Oh yeah, I put notes in here. I'm like, I learned how to take notes my junior year. I read college material with a critical lens. I was encouraged to, even when I didn't perform well, I wasn't that was the I wasn't flunked even when I bought the farm. That was chemistry. Given leadership positions, this was Mr. Darling. So the HIFS students had this thing called Embark. It was a literary magazine. This is a copy of it. I didn't copy the cover, but it used to be just the HISP kids put together this literary magazine. But I was the editor this particular year. I decided that I wanted to invite more students into it. So me and the other editors, we went to all of the art classes and all of the English classes, and we solicited students from all over the school, and we've got all kinds of different artwork, and we got all kinds of different poems from kids all over the school. And then we had all of these different entries. So then we had to go through them and select them and put them in here. So this was something I was really, really proud of because it was kind of like my little brainchild to make sure that we had more representation of people in our school than just the HIFS students. It was amazing. It was amazing how much stuff we got from other kids that weren't in his program and how good it was, and how artistic it was, and and how interested other kids were in having their work shown. So yeah, it was really, really, really cool. And Mr. Einspaugh was another teacher. His name is in there too. He was my government and economics teacher my senior year. And he always challenged us to be not to be sheep, but to be shepherds, and to really think of ourselves as leaders of our generation. And as leaders, how did we expect, or how did we want to leave our country, our communities, our, um, you know, what legacy we wanted to leave. So to be challenged with that at 17 and 18 was really, really huge. Um, and, you know, was really important to my development as a young person, um, and thinking about where I wanted to do and where I wanted to go with myself in the future. I think, teachers are really instrumental to our culture and our society. There's a lot of conversation about how teachers are indoctrinating our students. Teachers have always been indoctrinators. Um, Anytime you take children out of their homes and put them in a public, like in a public institution, um, there there is that institution is doing some indoctrination, and that has always been part of it. It's just now become much more politicized because current cultural and political divides we have going on. It's not a new endeavor. It's always been there. I think teachers are first and foremost service providers. They're providing a service, and it's not babysitting. They are helping to educate your students, helping to raise your students, helping your students to find out who they are and who they want to be, and how they want to get there. This work has been highly politicized in the last, during my adulthood, in ways that I think is really damaging, particularly to public education. I am a wonderful product of public education. I think there should be more opportunities for children to have free and equitable access to public education, so that you can have a chaotic childhood and still become a person who contributes to society, is able to raise your own children, is able to educate yourself, is able to to see the world however much of it you want to see, or however little you want to see, who's able to have choices and is able to act upon those choices. That shouldn't be just for people whose parents are CFOs or CEOs or COOs in companies, or whose parents are multimillionaires. That shouldn't be for just a certain set of people. That should be for everyone. And public education has the ability to make that more of an opportunity for everyone. I think teachers should be respected and better paid. Anytime, like my oldest son is turning 27 this summer. He works as a person who runs a car wash. That's hard work, absolutely. But he gets paid more than a teacher does. And he doesn't have to have an education for that. So the teacher has to have a 4-year degree. The teacher has to go back for continuous training to keep their licensure. The teacher, if they want to, so you have to continue your education just to keep your licensures. There's so much, there's 3 credits that you have to maintain, to continue to get 3 to 6 credits. And then if you want to get a pay bump, then you have to go out and accrue more credits than that. Most people will get another degree. So you're paying more money to get a degree. But even then, my son who's about to turn 27 still makes more money than the average teacher who has a master's degree. There's something wrong with that, I think. It's not that I'm I devaluing what my son does. I don't. But I think that for the amount of education, for the amount of work, because teachers do so much work that is not paid for. They don't get paid for their after school hours. They don't get paid for their weekend hours. They don't get paid for the the education that they're doing on their own time. They don't get paid for any of those things. And they put so much work and effort and money into their classrooms. A lot of their own supplies, a lot of their own books, a lot of their own, blood, sweat, and tears. They don't get compensated. I think the average tax write-off is like $300. Really? Um, so I do think we need to assess what we really value in this country, um, because teachers are so instrumental in making sure that our young people are doing well as we learned through the pandemic. They are part of the pulse that helps us as workers, that helps us as parents, that helps us as communities to do the things that we're able to do. We need to start recognizing that and appreciating that. As I wrap up, I encourage you to thank a teacher today and every day. Show your appreciation in any way you see fit. Some people like to give teachers coffee gift cards. I know lots of teachers who love those things. You can do other stuff. Buy teachers flowers, give them cookies. Teachers like cookies and donuts and things like that. Or, the next time someone makes a disparaging remark about teaching or teachers, be curious. Ask them why they feel that way. What were their experiences in schools? Or how are they making schools or communities better places? Rather than complain, we need to find ways to work together to create the world we want to see. I always like to leave it on a positive note because I think that we can be the change we want to see. I fervently believe that that is the case. And I really want to encourage you to seek change in your own little power nexus or nexus of power. Um, Again, this has been Dr. Valerie Nyberg. It's another episode of Uncommon Voices, Uncommon Visions. Thank you so much for listening or watching. Feel free to like, share, or comment on this episode. And again, please reach out to your teachers, reach out to your educators. And the educators are your para educators. They're anyone, your maintenance crews, they're anyone who is in that building or in that system that's helping to educate your students. It doesn't just have to be the teachers themselves. There are a lot of people the counselors, for example, there are a lot of people who help in the educational process who don't get their due praise. So just thank an educator today. Thank you so much. Bye.